Good morning. Oh, come on. Good morning.
Good morning, teacher.
Thank you very much. My name is Craig Stone. I am a managing director for Alvarez & Marsal. Before that, I spent my youth working as a bank examiner for the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. I've been working here in Mexico with many of my friends in the room since 2012, and I'm honored to be part of this panel discussion today. Now, in just a minute, I'm going to introduce my friends who will be part of the discussion, but the topic, and I'm really excited about the topic, and I hope that you're excited about the topic as well. So, we know that through the process of opening up an account, all banks have an onboarding procedure, and you do your customer due diligence. But our topic today is that customer due diligence doesn't end at onboarding. It is an ongoing process. Now, we're going to have a discussion, and so feel free to raise your hand and ask questions to the distinguished panelists as we go through, or we can have time at the end. But I think it's a great topic, and I'm really, really excited about us talking about it here today. So, on my far left, we have, probably needs no introduction, Danny Gutierrez. Danny is from Ocean Bank. He is well known throughout the Americas as to his knowledge around anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, Bank Secrecy Act, human trafficking. He is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the experts in this field. So next to Danny, we have Luis. Luis is the compliance officer for FINCRIME Bank in Monterrey, Mexico. Luis has an accounting degree. He's been involved in work in the United States, as well as Central and South America. He's also an expert in his field around anti-money laundering. Before coming to FINCRIME, Luis worked at American Express, BNP Paribas, Invex, and HSBC. And then last but not least is my good friend Manuel Montenegro. Manuel is a well-educated person with a law degree from Anáhuac University. He's been involved in the Financial Action Task Force. He's also been involved in discussions around world trade. He's been a negotiator around international treaties. He has 17 years of experience in banking and anti-money laundering. He's worked for many organizations. He's worked for American Express here in Mexico. He was the director for anti-money laundering there. And most recently, well, I shouldn't say that, up until recently, he was in charge of anti-money laundering for Banco Azteca at Grupo Salinas, and he currently is the anti-money laundering and sanctions officer for Grupo Financiero Santander. So here's how we're going to approach this today. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the complexities of onboarding and knowing your customer, and Danny has put together, I think, a really good slide that he's going to sort of walk everyone through to kind of set the stage for our discussion today. I think we're going to get the slide loaded up here in just a minute. So in the meantime, you guys buckle up. Let's have some fun. And the only thing that's standing between you and lunch is our presentation.
Thank you, Craig. It's good to see everybody back once again. For those of you who are wondering, my colleague Oscar Fernandez made it He's right there. So I made it clear to the audience yesterday on the topic of foreign correspondent banking. We had the plan of, obviously compliance, but the business line, so the business line is here. Oscar, welcome to the group. Yeah, Craig, thanks for that intro, and again, very happy to be back. What you see right now is FinCEN CDD Final Rule FAQ number 3, which came out in April of 2018 as the guidelines to CDD. Basically, this is telling the financial service industry what due diligence needs to be done, and I'll go through it very quickly. This is the textbook stuff that our government puts out. So you've got a customer that you're onboarding, then you've got a company A on one side, a company B on another side, then you got Alan who owns 60%, Betty who owns 40%, and then on the other side, you have Betty who owns 33, Carl who owns 33, and Diane 33. FinCEN's guidance for this, and again, this is a very simple little diagram right there, was that for us to get to the minimum number that FinCEN put out, which is 25%, you had to kind of add Betty to her 40% to that 50 on one side, and Betty on the other side, 33 to that 50%. So there's a little bit of math involved there in order for you to get to whoever owns more than 25%. Now, when we saw this, and again in South Florida, we've been working for years on trying to find out who's behind the company, years. When we saw this, we said, oh, if life were that easy. This sounds very easy. The reason why I say that is because this is my day to day. This is what I have to do in order to decipher who owns 25% at the de minimis of what FinCEN's telling me. Now, this gets very complex, but what you see right there is a real case scenario that I worked at my financial institution. And there's a couple of things that I want to point out here. First of all, for the attorneys who are in the room, an attorney does this, okay? It's not the customer themselves. This is an attorney who specializes in tax planning, in, any other services for customers who have issues with security, who have issues with estate planning. Maybe I've got in the middle of a divorce and I don't want a certain part of my family to find out that I've got this investment. Or if there are multiple investors, in this particular scenario, this was a hotel. And so we had on one side a bunch of investors, on the other side a bunch of other investors who came together as a pool. They get with an attorney and this is done for the right reasons. However, anybody can tell that for beneficial ownership, this is a headache. Because while some folks do this for the right reasons, there are going to be other people who love this because you can hide very easy in plain sight. That's the first thing. The second thing is very plain simple. FinCEN calls for us to do 25% as a de minimis, but do you think my examiner is going to be fine with 25% there? To make life easy for us here, very quickly, if I would go with FinCEN's guidance in this particular scenario, which again was a hotel who requested a $20 million loan at my bank, if I would go with the 25%, I'm only going to get the green boxes. Every single thing in red is under the 25% threshold. And therefore, if I have this structure, do you think my examiner is going to feel fine that I am not paying attention to the red and I'm only going after that green? So what I want to say with that is what it calls for financial institutions that are in a high-risk jurisdiction. Get this, I'm saying this here in Mexico City. Miami is a high-risk jurisdiction. Okay, high intensity for drugs. We've got, international business all over from Central, South America and the regions. And of course, scenarios like this. This again, and to kind of like to wrap it up for this scenario, this is also an issue because it poses this particular component. I've said it two, three times. This is my fourth time I'm going to say this. This is a local hotel in Miami. Okay, that LLC, North Miami Hotel, like I called it right there. Again, all these names are made up, but this is a real life case. is a hotel that anybody going to Miami is going to drive through and go, oh yeah, here's the hotel. It's right there. It's not in Mexico, not in Colombia. It's right there in Miami. It has one of the big 5 or 4 names that we all know. So when the business line brings this in, and the bank may consider that this is a very low-risk account. Oh, hotel, Coral Gables. What's wrong with that? It's a local LLC, no foreign business. But when we peeled that onion, we had Venezuelan PEPs behind this. We had trust companies. We had Panamanian bearer share corporations that needed to be amended for articles of incorporation. And so again, that local LLC posing like a little white little bunny, very innocent, becomes, when you peel that onion, an incredible, dangerous, risky monster because of those onions that, again, if your institution is not going below what FinCEN is telling us, which is 25%, and perhaps adapt an internal policy to go lower than the 25%, you would not be knowing what kind of a complex structure you would have within those bands. And finally, to conclude, very recent, this was, I guess, maybe less than a month ago, there's something that's worrying me from the compliance section. I'm sure, Craig, you know what I'm talking about, but there is a proposed new bill in regards to customer due diligence. The bill, if you guys want to write it down and maybe research that, that is right now proposed in Treasury, is Bill number 2513. And for beneficial ownership, which came into effect May of last year, our government has said, okay, there are 2 prongs that we need to find out. The first one is, who owns that company on paper? Okay, articles of incorporation, the certificates, who's on paper? And number 2, who is the person who controls that? Do you have a president? Do you have a treasurer? But this new bill that again is proposed, Bill 2513, is now requesting a 3rd prong. This is brand new, guys. That 3rd prong is very broad. The 3rd prong is calling for financial institutions to define, number 1, the control, number 2, who's on paper, but number 3, who receives, get this, this is verbatim, substantial economic benefits from the assets of the corporation or the LLC. What does substantial economic benefits mean? How am I going to plug that in to my KYC process? How is the business line going to request that customer? What number are we going to use? The definition of substantial economic benefits is yet to be defined, but is causing concern at this moment because of complexity and ambiguity in the language. And of course, our attorneys are also working to see if we've got some sort of clarity on that issue. So Craig, there it is. That is all more or less from my perspective, the onboarding process, the complexities, the issues that lie within opening up an account from the CDD purpose. And of course, I think it's a good segue for what happens next.
Thank you, Danny. I'm curious. You sent me this, I took a look at it. Was this a deposit relationship or a loan relationship when it landed on your plate?
Both. Both, excuse me. Deposit and loans at the same time.
So I think what's interesting is that at least my experience has been, that banks do a reasonably good job on their customer due diligence on depository relationships. But they've had less history and maybe less emphasis on doing the customer due diligence work around loan customers. And in many cases, the transaction monitoring software may have 15 or 20 different scenarios that are almost always focused upon deposit transactions.
The reason why I said both in our business line and confirm that, Oscar, when they are working on a loan, of course, they're going to cross-sell.
So absolutely.
And so they want that DDA so that the DDA basically services the loan. Not only that, number 2, and I learned this the hard way, when they go up to loan committee, they want to have that relationship to present to loan committee saying, oh, but he's got $800,000 in a DDA. It's a long-standing customer. So that loan committee goes, oh, okay, well, they've got a checking account, they've got a good balance, why not? Approved. So.
Exactly. So as you can see, in some instances, even something as simple as a hotel, as Danny said, as you start to peel back the layers of the onion, you start to realize that there is significantly more risk associated with this client than initially meets the eye. Now, that's at onboarding.
Yeah.
So remember, our topic today is that customer due diligence does not end at onboarding. So if we think a little bit about some of the tools or the processes that banks will undertake to try to keep up with their clients, in many cases they're going to use negative news services that may run every night, maybe once a week, maybe once a month. It depends upon the bank. In other cases, you should have a relatively robust customer risk rating model in place where you are incorporating transactional activity and you're incorporating negative news and you're incorporating items that the customer may be involved in that were outside of what they told you at onboarding. Now that customer risk rating then, if it changes, that would trigger some additional work that may have to be done by the bank. So as we sort of now have this fireside chat, if you will, I'm going to turn to Luis, and we're going to talk a little bit about, and Luis and his experience, how do banks leverage customer risk rating information to monitor changes in customer behavior? So Luis.
Thank you, Craig. I'm going to speak in Spanish. I'm really a little more comfortable speaking in my language. Gracias por la invitación. Y bueno, tratando de seguir un poco la línea de lo que nos platicaba Janiel, justo en el tema de después del onboarding y en el due diligence, pues hacia dónde vamos, ¿no? O sea, nosotros estamos evolucionando constantemente, tenemos herramientas tecnológicas, ¿no? En mi experiencia, lo que veo y lo que se ha platicado en esta sesión es el tema de la ciberseguridad, pero en mi opinión hay algo muy importante. Podemos tener herramientas pues, que nos den información muy certera, pero necesitamos el personal y la capacitación para analizar toda esta información, ¿no? Cuando tenemos toda esta información que nos arrojan nuestros sistemas, ¿cómo lo analizamos? ¿Cómo manejamos toda esta base, ¿no? Y entonces la capacitación viene desde la parte de monitoreo, viene en la parte de los sistemas, porque además no solo estamos evolucionando en el sector, esto es una evolución también del crimen financiero, ¿no? En donde pues esto ya no solamente es un combate, pareciera que también es una competencia, van también un paso adelante y evolucionando en la forma en la que pueden introducir los recursos de forma ilícita. Entonces es muy importante en la parte del onboarding, una vez que es nuestro cliente, cómo lo vamos a monitorear, ¿no? Tenemos nuestras herramientas de monitoreo, pero creo que es importante tener gente analítica que lo sepa, ¿no? O sea, va más allá únicamente de tener un alertamiento, verificarlo y hacer un reporte. Es importante que podamos vincularlo, que podamos ver quién es esta persona, con quién está operando, a dónde está enviando, haciendo sus operaciones, son locales, son otros países. En este caso, si tenemos accionistas, hasta dónde llegaron, los revisamos también, vimos quiénes son los beneficiarios, dónde están operando, etcétera. Entonces, no solamente es la parte de tener un tema de evolución tecnológica, sino también cómo voy a analizar y cómo voy a utilizar toda esta información para determinar un grado de riesgo certero de los clientes.
Thank you, Luis. So as we think about how, in your experience, how often are customers risk rated?
Yo creo que debe ser constante. O sea, en mi opinión, y como debe ser es, pues tenemos el riesgo inicial, el riesgo de los clientes, pero esto tiene que ser constante. No nos podemos ir solamente con el inicial y ver la operativa. Tenemos que ver el comportamiento y es donde es importante bajar tratándolo de ver en un plano en el sistema financiero, pues llegar con los que tienen el contacto directo con el cliente, ¿no? A lo mejor su transaccionalidad es normal, pero logras identificar algo que no es coherente o hay una usualidad que ve la persona, no sé, vamos a llamar en la sucursal. Entonces, esto tiene que ser constante. Podemos cambiar el nivel y el grado de riesgo de los clientes por muchas razones, porque nos rompe el perfil, porque nos hicieron un reporte, porque identificamos que operó con alguien más. Nos ha pasado, y algo que se ha visto en el gremio es cuando pues tienes un cliente que está operando o alguno de sus beneficiarios opera con alguien que está en una lista. Entonces, ¿cómo vinculas eso, no? ¿Hasta dónde vamos a llegar en voy a terminar la relación comercial con este cliente porque alguno de sus beneficiarios o alguien con quien operó también con alguien en una lista? Entonces, eso nos puede mover el nivel de riesgo, ¿no? Decir, bueno, pues este cliente le voy a hacer un monitoreo más exhaustivo, le voy a subir el nivel de riesgo, no únicamente por lo que marcan justo las herramientas o la tecnología. Hay un tema de sensibilidad. La sensibilidad y la capacitación para mí son muy, muy, muy importantes, y que la gente y que todos logremos identificar si el grado de riesgo de un cliente se debe mover por su comportamiento.
Agreed. Now, so if we think about some of the other discussions that we've had yesterday, we talked a little bit about sanctions and about OFAC screening. I thought it would probably be interesting to hear from Manuel about, in his experience, how do banks leverage that type of information through their customer due diligence or enhanced due diligence process?
Sí, gracias, Craig. Hola, ¿escucha? Voy a ir un paso atrás en lo que me estás preguntando, y hay aspectos que son de suma importancia que consideremos. ¿A quién le vamos a abrir la cuenta? Lo estamos haciendo por una oportunidad de negocio. Es alguien que está dentro del target market, dentro del segmento de clientes a los que la institución está dirigida, o posiblemente es una oportunidad de negocio que permite buenos ingresos, a lo mejor expansión comercial, pero con un tipo de cliente o tipo de operaciones que no son a las que está acostumbrada o habituada la entidad. Y además de acostumbrada y habituada, me refiero a si está preparada con los controles suficientes, y no me refiero únicamente a prevención de lavado de dinero, sino hasta aspectos tan simples que me ha tocado ver en vivo, en donde la entidad que recibe este nuevo cliente, ante una pregunta de una autoridad donde quiere saber si conoce a fondo el negocio y qué es lo que están haciendo, hay ocasiones en las que la institución no puede responderle a la autoridad, le cuenta una historia de lo que entiende que está haciendo su cliente y acaba por meter al cliente en un problema. Y no hablo de que el cliente sea no hablamos de ninguna inusualidad ni de ningún problema con la cuenta, simplemente es que la entidad, al no estar lista a recibir ese tipo de cliente y ante cuestionamientos que puede explicar de forma incorrecta, puede terminar causando un problema, y no solo en el mismo país, porque pudiera ser una cuenta corresponsal. Entonces, imagínense que de repente reciben como institución algunos cuestionamientos de una autoridad de otro país, porque el banco en donde tienen ustedes una cuenta, pues les explicó todo lo que ustedes hacen, pero al revés, ¿sí? Entonces, yo creo que es algo sumamente importante, y más que el control en específico de cómo identificar a través de media negativa o con un proceso ya sea diario o semanal de cruce de listas, o sea, con un tema de sanciones, es ¿realmente la entidad financiera está lista para ese tipo de negocio? En el caso de que sea un negocio nuevo, ok. Son aspectos que se tienen que valorar. ¿Qué tanto platican y qué tanto hablan las áreas de control con las áreas de negocio? Parecería que se ven en el comité y se ven cada 15 días a veces, o cada mes, a veces se pide ahí alguna aprobación, determinada cuenta no cumple con todos los requisitos, ¿por qué no nos permiten que se abra y en 15 días pueden completar el expediente? ¿No? Que a lo mejor lo que está faltando es la firma o la identificación del representante legal, que es quien va a abrir la cuenta y que es quien va a mover los fondos. Y a lo mejor ni siquiera es representante legal de ese cliente. Entonces, eso es a veces lo que se platica en el día a día, pero lo que me he percatado en el medio es que a veces falta esa comunicación de que las áreas de compliance entiendan perfectamente todos y cada uno de los negocios que se hacen o que se pretenden realizar, y que las áreas de negocio entiendan perfectamente los requisitos y lo que van a necesitar en caso de cambiar el tipo de negocio. Ahora, una vez identificado esta situación, se tiene que determinar, y yo pensaría que de forma conjunta, si la entidad está lista para embarcarse en un nuevo negocio. ¿Están listos o no? Ahora, ¿solo se presenta una oportunidad o es un mercado al que quieren acceder? Y es ahí donde hay que tener muchísimo cuidado, porque si por una oportunidad de negocio temporal que no va a cambiar el tipo de mercado de la institución, te puede meter en un problema, pues esa debida diligencia, por más que esté bien realizada por parte del área de cumplimiento, finalmente no necesariamente va a blindar a la institución. Y reitero, no hablo de que estén realizando alguna conducta negativa, sino de que la institución esté lista para el nuevo tipo de productos o de clientes que quieren manejar. ¿Cuánto va a costar esto? ¿Por qué? Pues el negocio al final lo que busca es atraer más clientes, nuevos productos, que crezca, y todos buscamos eso en un ambiente de control. Pero yo creo que lo que se mide muchas veces es cuánto es lo que vamos a ganar, cuánto nos va a dejar este cliente, pero no cuánto vamos a tener que invertir si el riesgo inherente de la entidad sube y por lo tanto los controles o los mitigantes tienen que incrementarse. Entonces, a veces, después de varios de semanas o incluso meses ya aprobada la relación, cuando no hay una buena comunicación, una comunicación constante, por fin platican las dos áreas y negocio se da cuenta que requiere una inversión importante en controles adicionales. Y obviamente pues eso no le gusta a nadie, ¿no? Ya está corriendo el negocio, no tenemos capital ahorita, veremos pasemos este requerimiento para el siguiente año, y es ahí donde empiezan los problemas, ¿sí? Ahora, ¿qué tipo de revisión ya después de que está abierta la cuenta? ¿Qué tipo de enhanced due diligence queremos hacer? ¿Queremos hacerlo interno o de forma externa? Vamos a aceptar que ciertas firmas o consultorías realicen esa actualización constante o esa debida diligencia de determinado tipo de clientes que lo requieran, como algunos tipos de personas morales de alto riesgo, en particular entidades financieras, por ejemplo, actividades vulnerables. No estamos buscando que lo realice un tercero. ¿Quién determina quién es ese tercero? ¿Qué experiencia debe tener ese tercero? ¿A cuántas personas ha auditado? ¿Qué ha encontrado? ¿Cuál es el grado de expertise de las personas que van a venir y se van a sentar a darles el resultado de lo que identificaron en su cliente? Ahora, esto también es una inversión. Es parte de lo que se debe comprometer para la ganancia de estos nuevos negocios. Se determina que sea interno. Alguien interno le va a dar seguimiento a esa cuenta, que a lo mejor puede ser permanente, correcto. Mes con mes va dándole un monitoreo, pero también tiene que hacer una actualización o un enhanced due diligence anual. ¿Quién en la organización lo va a hacer? La persona que está disponible, el head de PLD, el oficial de cumplimiento. Veo difícil que el oficial de cumplimiento o el head de PLD tengan el tiempo de estar haciendo este tipo de revisiones y más de estar viajando para hacerlas in situ. Entonces, otro aspecto que tenemos que cuidar mucho es a quién le encargamos esta función. Porque entonces pueden tener los expedientes actualizados, no tenemos ningún problema con eso, cumple con el checklist, perfecto. Pero a lo mejor es el checklist con una falta de visión de alguien que entienda perfectamente, y lo comenté al principio, tanto los productos con los que opera su institución y cómo los está utilizando el tipo de cliente. Entonces, yo creo que estos son aspectos que se deben tomar en cuenta, Craig. No sé si tengas algún comentario adicional.
So my distinguished panelists here have opened up, I think, a lot of cans of worms here. We're talking about first line, second line, and third line of defense. And we all know that onboarding is part of the first line of defense. We know that the line of business is responsible for maintaining compliance. The compliance function at a bank is oversight. The compliance function is not an operational function. I would ask for a show of hands, but I don't want to embarrass anyone. But just think about this. If you are in compliance, your second line of defense, your oversight, how often are you asked to do something operational? Occasionally? Never? Regularly? Just something to think about. We also talked a little bit about negative news, and this is going to segue into sort of the next part of this discussion. Talked about negative news. And I'm sure that the banks out here all use some form of negative news. There's great negative news services. And we talked a little bit about negative news early on and the onboarding or the continuous monitoring of your customers. But what we see in some cases, there's a confusion as to how to use negative news, and more importantly, what sort of a percentage match are you going to employ at your bank? Not too long ago, I asked the question to a bank. I asked it to the bank president, and he said, well, there's not a problem, Craig. We use 100% match. There's nobody's laughing at that?
I did.
Because if you use 100% match, you're probably going to miss 100% of the time. And we think about that. Everyone probably remembers, I'm going to go back in time a little bit, but there was an individual who was a colonel in the country of Libya, and his name was Gaddafi. We all know Gaddafi, right? Sometimes his name was spelled with a K, and other times with a Q. If you used 100% match, you could actually miss him depending upon how he spelled his name.
Craig, I think there were more than 100 ways that you could, from algorithms or type of spellings for Muammar Gaddafi, so it's a very complex little thing.
So from an experience as a former regulator and an experience in working with banks as a consultant, you know, we typically see banks have if they're using a numeric match, somewhere between about 65 and 70% sort of is the norm. But out of curiosity, Danny, your experience, what does that tell us?
Awesome. Thank you, Craig. A couple of things with negative press. I'm going to get to that question first, and then I want to go into a little discussion here. Yeah, it's a very complex scenario. Nowadays, software systems come with algorithms, sound decks, abbreviations, keywords, so there's a lot of technical components which I am not an expert in, but they are out there. So guidance number one, if you're considering purchasing software solutions, any type of vendor, and nothing wrong with the vendors, but they'll tell you they'll do everything and the dishes. Be careful with that, okay? There have been some banks who purchased a system, plug it in. I purchased a system and they don't have it calibrated, validated. So again, the first thing is when you decide on that, be careful, do your math, have it validated, bring someone who's an expert in the matter to review it, et cetera, et cetera. But here's something important that I want to underline with negative press. About a year ago, FIBA member institutions in Miami were deadlocked in the middle of the following survey that I sent out. And this goes along the lines of what Manuel was saying. Governance. Who in the bank is going to take care of negative press? Is it compliance? Is it the business line? For proposed accounts, prospect customers, who is going to say, I feel okay? Who's going to give that approval? Someone has to review the negative press. Someone has to make that decision. And we were deadlocked in the middle at FIBA. As the chair of the AML committee, I sent out a survey and I wanted answers. And the answers came back and half of our banks said, no, that's compliance. I relay everything to the BSA officer and they've got to sign off. And then the other half was saying, well, that should be a division manager. The branding of a financial institution is all we have, really. We have to all safeguard our banks, the name of the institution, and who better knows that than the account officers? They're supposed to know your customer. So from our own experience, and because there was a deadlock in the middle, no decision to the left or to the right, should it be BSA, should it be the business line? Everyone basically had to make that decision. I came back to the member institutions and FIBA and I said, look, the responses come back in the middle. For Ocean Bank, I can speak on behalf of the institution. We met with the senior leaders of the business line of our bank and the business BSA components of the institution, and the decision was made that that lies on the business side. Now, we will serve in for guidance. We will be there, we will help them. But the ultimate person who brings in an account for our institution lies upon the business line. And I'm going to give you guys 3 of the minimum guidance that from the BSA world, from regulatory risk, where I head up a unit, we provide to the business line when they encounter that negative press. The first thing, number 1, important, a letter from the customer or the customer's attorney describing the situation from A to B of what happened. You went into Google and you plugged in Oscar Fernandez, and I pick on him on every panel, nothing. But you plugged in and then he did this, there's this negative press, and you're planning to onboard this customer. So the first thing is ask him or his attorney, preferably an attorney, because that way you have an independent opinion, for A to Z what happened in the scenario. Number 2, in that reply, request from the customer any supporting documentation that he or his attorney may be able to provide the financial institution to back that statement up. What type of supporting documentation? Well, if this was a case that went to court, perhaps the final court decree that the guy, came out good, or he paid his dues, or whatever it is, or updated articles that came up in the news. If your Google came up and it's 5 years old and not everything is in Google, not every article is in there, maybe he has some local newspaper update that came up recently where his name is finally cleared from the wrongdoing. And then finally, a final disposition type of an acceptance of that information, and how the business line, if you decide it's the business line who's going to approve the relationship, how does the business line think that these steps mitigate the reputational risk that this prospect brings to the financial institution? And of course, if in the course of any of the supporting documentation or negative information, there is something from a BSA point of view that is going to bring on a BSA risk for the bank, then I will get involved and I say, don't open that account. But reputational risk and negative press in this day and age, you've got sexual harassment and, you know, all sorts of negative stuff that really compliance, why am I involved in that? That brings on, again, a reputational risk to the brand, to the name of the institution, but really non-compliance related. So there's a couple of tools there that I think are useful for the group, but it is, like you said, Craig, an ongoing basis. I think that the scanning of information is something that leads into artificial intelligence, which we've talked along this conference a lot of. And I think that the day of tomorrow is something that, you know, every institution is going to need.
Great, thank you. We have probably about 10 minutes left, and I want to maybe shift gears just a little bit. You're probably wondering, or maybe you're not, maybe some people are wondering, okay, Craig, this is good. We're going to do our customer due diligence, and we'll do something along the way to make sure that we know who our customers are and we keep up with their transactions. But what really is the worst thing that's going to happen if we don't do a very good job? I think everyone has probably kept up with what's happening in like Estonia and the Baltic states, where there's been at least one bank that was starved for funding and closed. The U.S. Treasury implemented some guidance around USA Patriot Act, and essentially that particular bank was determined to be a bank that was primarily involved in illegal money laundering and terrorist financing. So they were starved out and they died from liquidity issue. I think maybe 4 years ago we had a bank in Panama that if in fact they had done some analysis like Danny had done around one of their customers, they would have determined that maybe there was some involvement with the Waqed family. That bank is gone. There was a bank in Malta that it was determined that they were involved in illegal money laundering and terrorist financing. That bank is gone. So maybe that's the worst thing that's going to happen. But other issues that could happen to your institution if in fact that you aren't doing a good job around monitoring your customers and performing additional analyses around customer due diligence and enhanced due diligence could be losing correspondent relationships. Because all banks need to be able to have correspondent banks because they need to be able to clear items. And when a U.S. bank or a European bank opens an account for another bank, the customers of that bank now have become the customers of Danny's bank. Danny's bank's actively involved in correspondent banking. And if you aren't able to tell the right story around your customer due diligence and your customer risk ratings and how you're measuring that risk, and when you close accounts, even though you do have a correspondent relationship, you could potentially lose that relationship. Now, Manuel talked about the money involved in doing that. I can assure you that the money involved in having a robust customer due diligence and enhanced due diligence process pales in comparison to the cost associated with losing a correspondent relationship. So, Danny, I wanted to ask you a question. How important is it for you, in your experience, is the customer due diligence process when you are considering opening a correspondent account?
It's a great question. First of all, let's not go too far away as Estonia. There was a bank in Puerto Rico maybe 2-3 months ago that was actually raided by the FBI because of the bank trying to have sanctions with Venezuela. So that's right here in Venezuela, obviously, for the region, is of great concern. In our conference in Miami in March, we had 4 reporters from Mexico actually interview me because of concern, no, of the region in regards to Venezuela, in regards to sanctions. So that process, Craig, that you mentioned right there is of extreme importance. However, it is also very delicate. FATF, in its 2016 guidance on correspondent banking, made it very clear that there is no expectation for the U.S. or respondent bank to know the customer's customer, or KYCC. However, on the other hand, there is a member institution of FIBA that just last year, because we meet at the end of each year to discuss results from audits and exams, that relayed that there was an examiner from one of our regulators who asked them to actually perform KYCC on their risk assessment. We're almost getting there, guys, KYCC. So this institution had no way to go rather than to kind of agree, but to put in writing that the institution follows FATF's 2016 guidance on correspondent banking. And obviously, there was some work done in the risk assessment for this particular institution. Now, what I'm trying to say, folks, is we need a business. We need the business to run, okay? There's no requirement, no regulatory requirement for me, if I'm onboarding a FINCRIME or you, Manuel, in Santander, to ask for your portfolio. There's nothing that is in writing for me to request that. However, big however, if you want to provide me with some information about who the top customers that are going to use the correspondent bank account, and maybe a little more information about what they do, what jurisdictions am I to expect to see through the foreign correspondent bank account, I can guarantee you guys that you would have less requests from information from my analysts, because all that information will be stored within our institution.
Absolutely.
Again, no regulatory requirement, but it would make your life much more easy.
And you will be ready for answer
Of course.
to the authority.
We wouldn't have to go to you guys and say, hey, we need more information on this. We would already have that knowledge. We would have maybe public information that you guys can share. And then when the examiner comes in and says, well, wait a second, what do you know about all this? Because the FATF guidance actually tells us that we need to go and search for the flow of funds. So if I know that your institution tells me, well, look, we have a large Mexican commercial portfolio and the majority are going to send payments through wire transfers to suppliers in the United States, perhaps in Europe, I'm going to search for that. I'm also going to search for the top players, and I'm going to search to see if I can find some information, but if that information is already here, done deal.
And I love the fact that you brought up what the regulatory requirement is, and then what may occur during an examination.
Yep.
Now, the examiners, I can say this because I was one for a very long time. I had no gray hair when I became a regulator. They all know the regulations forwards and backwards. They are regulatory geeks. That is the same in any country. If you're a regulator in Mexico, you know those regs forwards and backwards. When changes to the regs come out, you're probably reading them in your pajamas. That's how much you really are into this. But they also look at the big picture. And they're going to ask for information that may not be a regulatory requirement, and they may say it is an industry standard.
Yeah.
So that's the key word there. So I think we're almost out of time. I would like to see if there's any questions from the audience. Really? Well, I want to thank my panelists, to Manuel, to Luis, and Daniel. Thank you very much. More importantly, I want to thank David. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with David here at this conference. It's an awesome conference. Thank you very much.